My name is Evelyn Carter, and I want to share something I've never said out loud this way before. For years, I carried the label of being the family embarrassment. It wasn't whispered behind my back, it was said in the open, at the table, like I was a stain on everyone's reputation. The memory still stings, but it's also what makes this story worth telling. Because on one Christmas night, at exactly 7:15 in the evening, a phone call came that turned everything upside down. That night marked the beginning of a transformation I never saw coming. Christmas that year should have been a celebration. The living room glowed with garlands tucked around the mantel. The old china gleamed on the table, and the scent of prime rib filled the house. I had polished silver until my hands ached, arranged pine cones by each plate, and tried to make the home feel timeless, like stepping into a memory worth keeping. But beneath the soft glow of the tree lights, I felt something colder. My daughter-in-law, Sienna, carried herself with a polished indifference that made me feel smaller with every glance. She didn't need to say much. Her eyes swept across the house, the wrinkles in my skin, the curtains that had hung for decades. It was as if my life was outdated, something to be quietly mocked. And my son, Michael, said nothing. His silence was its own agreement. I held my smile as if it were porcelain, delicate and ready to crack. On the outside, I played the role of hostess. Inside, though, I was shrinking, hearing the unspoken judgment echo louder than the carols in the background. I could feel myself labeled an embarrassment to my own family. There was a pause, a stillness in the room that seemed to underline the sting. I swallowed it, kept my dignity, but I knew something inside me had fractured. That night, while everyone else laughed and ate, I carried the weight of their judgment alone. And yet, it stirred something in me, memories of what I had once been, and questions about what I had lost. Those thoughts would not let me go, leading me back to the story of motherhood that shaped me. Motherhood was the thread that stitched my life together. Even in the hardest years, Harold was gone more often than not, working long shifts to keep us afloat. So much of the day-to-day rested on my shoulders. I worked 2 jobs at times, rushing from the diner to the night shift, just to make sure Michael never felt the emptiness of an empty fridge. There were nights when exhaustion nearly won, but then came mornings filled with pancakes in the kitchen, the smell of butter and cinnamon pulling him out of bed. The kitchen became our safe place, where traditions were born out of scraps and love. And somehow, even with bills stacked high, I made it to his little league games, cheering louder than anyone, because I wanted him to know he mattered. Those sacrifices weren't glamorous, but they were the truest expression of my love. I believed those small rituals of food and presence would carry him through life. What I never imagined was that one of those simple recipes shared in an ordinary moment would soon be captured, and that recording would turn everything upside down. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind you barely remember until it changes everything. My neighbor's granddaughter, Lila, just 8 years old, wandered into my kitchen while I was mixing a batch of cookies. She had her little phone in hand, recording like it was a game. I didn't mind. I showed her how to fold the dough gently, how to let the butter soften before mixing. When I added a pinch of dried lavender and a splash of my homemade vanilla, her eyes widened as though I'd just performed a magic trick. She giggled, calling it a secret potion. And I laughed, brushing flour from my hands. To her, it was enchanting. To me, it was just how I'd always baked. She asked if she could share the video online, and I waved her on, thinking nothing of it. It was only cookies, only a child's delight in a simple recipe. I never imagined anyone outside our street would care. But life has a way of turning small, ordinary things into doorways you never see coming. That little clip, filmed in the soft light of my kitchen, was about to travel further than I ever had. And the next phone call would prove just how far. It happened in the most ordinary way over dinner, when I was still trying to shake off the sting of being called an embarrassment. My son's phone buzzed, and he answered absent-mindedly, but then his face changed. On the other end, his boss told him that Forbes had seen me. Not just seen me, they wanted to feature me. For a second, the room froze. Just hours earlier, I'd been reduced to my wrinkles and old furniture. And now, the world beyond our table was recognizing something different, something valuable. The irony hit me like a lightning bolt. I felt the humiliation unravel, replaced by a rush of disbelief. That call was the spark. What followed was an avalanche I never could have imagined. The days that followed felt like living inside a whirlwind. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing calls, emails, messages from people I had never met but who suddenly wanted a piece of my story. Morning shows wanted me to appear. Publishers offered cookbook deals, investors pitched restaurant concepts, and even lifestyle magazines asked for interviews. It was surreal. For so many years, I had been overlooked, almost invisible even inside my own family. And now, strangers from across the country were telling me that what I had to share mattered. The same hands that were once dismissed as too old-fashioned were suddenly seen as valuable, authentic, and worth celebrating. Excitement kept me awake at night, but so did disbelief. How could life turn so completely in a matter of days? I felt both lifted and unsteady, as though the ground beneath me had shifted and I was still trying to find my balance. Amid the chaos, a thought began to form quietly in the back of my mind. Maybe this wasn't just about me. Maybe it was about something larger, a chance to build a table that could welcome everyone. That seed of an idea would soon change everything again. When the video spread beyond anything I could imagine, I began reading through the comments. Thousands of strangers shared their stories. Some said they missed their grandmother's kitchen, the smell of cinnamon rolls on a Sunday morning. Others admitted they never learned family recipes and felt something precious was gone forever. A few even wrote that they would pay to sit at a table like mine, just to feel that warmth again. That was when it struck me. There was a gap, an entire generation longing for guidance, and another holding wisdom but often feeling invisible. The skills, the traditions, the quiet dignity of hands that had baked bread, stitched quilts, grown gardens for decades, those treasures were slipping away. I began to imagine something bigger than myself. What if there was a space where people could come together, a place where elders could teach and younger folks could learn? Not just recipes, but life itself. That seed became Nana's Table, a platform built not only on food, but on connection, where traditions could be passed down like heirlooms, where no one had to feel forgotten. The vision filled me with a sense of purpose. Now, I just needed to see if others would believe in it too. That thought carried me into my first pitch. I still remember walking into that sleek office, my palms damp, my heart racing faster than I wanted to admit. Everywhere I looked, the world of startups felt built for youth fast talk, quick money, sharp edges, and there I was, a grandmother with a notebook full of ideas about recipes, traditions, and dignity. Jordan, the investor, sat across from me, polite but distant. I began carefully, explaining Nana's table as a bridge between generations, a platform where knowledge could live on. At first, I could sense the doubt another sentimental project that might not scale. But then I shifted. I stopped hiding behind slides and spoke about the evenings I spent keeping traditions alive for Michael, about the ache of invisibility so many elders carried, and about the hunger I'd seen in young people craving connection. That was when I saw Jordan lean forward. For the first time, there was curiosity in their eyes. By the end, they weren't just analyzing numbers, they were nodding, imagining with me. And then, almost as casually as a sigh, they offered to back me. I walked out with more than capital. I walked out with validation. But the real test was still ahead, building the dream into reality. When Michael asked me for a private cooking class, I froze for a moment. The same son who had once sat silently while his wife called me an embarrassment was now reaching out, almost shyly, with this request. My heart felt torn, still bruised, yet unable to turn away. We stood side by side in my kitchen, the air thick with unspoken words. I showed him how to chop onions, and as the sting brought tears to our eyes, I couldn't help but feel the metaphor in it, pain that could still soften us. As we kneaded dough, pressing and folding, it felt like we were mending something fragile, working our way back toward trust, one motion at a time. There was no need for speeches. The rhythm of cooking held us together. Passing down more than recipes, it was pieces of memory, love, and forgiveness. That class wasn't just for him, it was for us both. And soon, I would see how this same intimacy could ripple outward, touching the lives of strangers too. I still remember the sting the first time I saw Heritage Hub's launch. Their site was polished, glossy, and loud, parading celebrity endorsements, bold colors, and headlines that sounded eerily familiar. It was my idea, stripped of its soul and dressed up with money. My stomach dropped as if the ground had given way beneath me. I had poured my heart into Nana's table. Every recipe, every story, every connection was built with love and dignity. And now here it was, mirrored back at me, slicker, louder, richer. I felt outrage burning in my chest, but beneath it was something more fragile, fear. Fear that all my work, my purpose, even my chance to be seen, would be swallowed whole by people who never knew the ache behind it. It felt like erasure all over again. I had just begun to step into the light, and suddenly, someone else was reaching to pull the curtain closed. Doubt pressed down on me heavy as stone. Was I too small, too old, too late to compete for a moment? The weight almost crushed me. But sitting in that silence, I realized something they couldn't steal. They had the branding. I still had the heartbeat, and that was where my strength would have to rise. The day I learned the truth about Michael felt like the ground caved in beneath me. For weeks, I had sensed something off his guarded words, the way he avoided looking me in the eye when Heritage Hub came up. I told myself it was just stress, that I was imagining shadows. But then the confirmation landed like a hammer. My own son was working with Northbridge, feeding the very machine that had stolen my dream. It was more than betrayal. It was a knife turned inward, because this wasn't just business, it was blood. The son I had raised through double shifts and sleepless nights, the boy whose little league games I never missed, was standing on the other side of the battlefield. I felt anger, yes, but beneath it was heartbreak so deep it hollowed me out. I couldn't make sense of how ambition had outweighed loyalty, how silence had replaced love. That night, I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, staring at the same worn counter where I once taught him to cook. My hands trembled not from age, but from the weight of that truth. And still, somewhere in the ache, I knew I had to decide how to keep going. There came a point when the noise quieted, and what was left was emptiness. Heritage Hub was rising louder each day, and whispers spread that Nana's table had already been outmatched. The betrayal from Michael cut deeper than any corporate blow, and the faces of those who had trusted me, students, neighbors, strangers who believed, haunted me with unspoken disappointment. I was exhausted beyond tears, drained of fight. My kitchen, once a sanctuary, felt like a hollow shell. I would sit at the table, hands idle, wondering if all the love and labor had been for nothing. Even breathing felt heavy, like carrying a burden I could no longer lift. In that silence, I touched rock bottom, and I stayed there. For a long while, I thought the battle had been lost. But in that stillness, a sharper truth surfaced. Northbridge could hire designers, influencers, and armies of marketers. They could mirror my layout, borrow my slogans, even dress their site with pictures that mimicked mine. But what they could never take was the soul that birthed Nana's table. A recipe, after all, is just a list of steps. Anyone can copy it word for word. But the mind that created it, the years of sacrifice, the late nights working 2 jobs, the Sunday dinners that held a family together that cannot be replicated. My life was kneaded into every loaf, steeped into every simmering pot. That was my advantage. And suddenly, the despair lifted. This wasn't about competing on gloss or budgets. It was about holding ground on authenticity, on the irreplaceable spirit that no corporation could buy. I realized I didn't have to match their money. I only had to stay true to my essence. With that, a new fire rose in me. I would fight back, not with imitation, but with originality, not by chasing their shadow, but by shining a light they could never duplicate. The comeback was beginning. For a while, I thought I was standing alone, stripped of everything I had built. But then, something unexpected began to stir. Emails started trickling in. Handwritten notes appeared in my mailbox. Strangers, grandmothers, students, single parents shared how my recipes and my story reminded them of their own families, their own roots. It didn't come from an algorithm or a trending page. It came from kitchen tables, from church gatherings, from neighborhood groups where people passed my name along like a secret worth keeping. Northbridge had their money, their Polish, their endless ads. But what I had was trust. What I had was love woven into real lives. The community rose, not because I asked them to, but because they believed in something bigger than me. And their voices grew louder than any platform could silence. That groundswell of human connection became the soil where resilience could grow again. And in that moment, I knew it was time to rebuild this time, with deeper roots. When I first saw Camilla's article in Forbes, I almost couldn't believe it. There it was in black and white, Northbridge, exposed for copying, manipulating, and strong-arming their way into markets. What I had felt in my bones for months was suddenly validated on one of the world's biggest stages. The piece spread like wildfire. Headlines echoed it, social feeds lit up, and suddenly, the story wasn't just mine, it was everyone's. People were furious, and for the first time, Northbridge wasn't the one controlling the narrative. It felt like the ground shifted. My struggle, once dismissed as small and personal, now carried weight backed by undeniable credibility. And with that wave of attention, momentum finally turned in my favor. When I opened the door that evening, I never expected to find Richard, the CEO of Northbridge, standing on my porch. My safe space suddenly felt invaded, as if the air itself had turned heavier. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to bending people and markets to his will. And for a moment, I felt small inside my own home. He didn't need to raise his voice. His very presence was a kind of pressure, reminding me of the damage his company had done, of how close I'd come to losing everything. My heart pounded, my palms sweated, yet beneath the fear, something else flickered. I realized he had come here because I mattered, because what I had built, what I represented, couldn't simply be erased. That thought steadied me. His shadow might have filled my doorway, but my spirit began to rise against it. That night, in the silence of my kitchen after he left, I knew this confrontation wasn't the end. It was the spark for the final fight back. When the door finally closed behind Richard, it felt as if a storm had passed through my living room. The house was quiet again, but nothing felt the same. Word of the confrontation spread quickly, and for once, the narrative was not about Northbridge's power. It was about resilience, about refusing to be silenced. There was relief. Yes, but it was tempered by the bruises left behind. Trust had been broken. Battles had been fought, and my heart still carried the weight of betrayal. Yet, in the stillness, I saw how far I had come from being dismissed as an embarrassment to standing my ground against a giant. The fight was over, but its echoes lingered. And in those echoes, I began to search for meaning, for the deeper lessons this journey had pressed into me. When I opened Lila's letter, her small handwriting carried more weight than any headline ever could. She wrote about how she loved learning in my kitchen, how those afternoons made her feel safe, how she hoped she could one day pass it on to her own children. Her words stopped me. After all the battles, the betrayals, the noise of business, here was the quiet truth. It was never just about recipes or platforms. It was about love, memory, and the threads that bind us across generations. Reading her letter, I realized the real legacy wasn't measured in deals or recognition. It was in the hearts we touched, the lives we connected, and that truth carried me into my final reflection. If my story touched you in some way, I'd love for you to carry it forward. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that their voice matters, too. Leave a comment. I want to hear your reflections. And if you felt connected, a simple like helps this message reach farther. Thank you for being here.